So I wanted to talk a little bit about what four of us did yesterday. Venables, Jamba, and Losang, and Sepal and I went to the Beth Shalom Synagogue to join in the Vigil after the shooting in Pittsburgh. And it was so nice. We just walked in, and everybody, all the congregation members who greeted us along the way, are all saying, "Thank you for coming, thank you for coming." It's immediately the thing that we heard. And to which I responded, "Thank you for inviting us," because I was very grateful for that. And so there was a short service. Rabbi Tamar led it. It was very nice. It started out with a Hebrew chant that, of course, I knew from childhood. So I sang along. The meaning is quite a Dharma meaning. And then she spoke for a while, and then they invited the leaders from the other religions who were there. So all faith leaders and leaders of conscience went up on the stage. And then three of us, one a Catholic sister, one a leader of conscience, and then me, read different statements, different parts of it. And I controlled myself. I read what I was supposed to read, and then I said a few sentences extra. Because part of, the message that the rabbi gave, she emphasized two things: that people were frightened and they were outraged. And, there's a certain, religious feeling or feeling coming from various religions in this country. Because there was a Christian minister who spoke afterwards, the same kind of feeling from him, or the same vocabulary. But anyway, I wasn't frightened and I wasn't outraged. And I don't want to be frightened, and I don't want to be outraged. Okay? Yeah? To me, events like this, terrorist events, are time to wake up and to act. Yeah? I don't want to live my life in fear. I refuse to live my life in fear. And perhaps this is because I haven't faced this kind of thing directly in my lifetime. But I imagine a lot of people there haven't faced it in their lifetime, and yet it becomes fearful. And that's the strategy used in politics nowadays, too. People are terribly afraid of this caravan of invaders who are 2,000 miles away from the border. 8,000. Oh, they've gotten closer, 800 miles. Yeah, that are families fleeing bad circumstances. And now everybody's afraid, that they are invaders, like the Martians, are going to invade the country. And I refuse to live with a fearful mentality, because if you have that mentality, that colors everything in your life, and you can't greet people as friends. You can't greet them as brothers and sisters. Or maybe you do greet them as brothers and sisters, the brothers and sisters you were rivaling with and fighting with when you were a youngster. But that's not the meaning of greeting people as brothers and sisters. So, so it was just interesting for me on a personal level to hear things expressed in that kind of way, which I know other people feel, but I'm just stating for myself how I don't fit in. But that's okay. And I don't want to be outraged because I don't want to be angry. Again, I don't want to live my life in anger against other people. What a miserable way to live one's life. And it also doesn't do any good. Yeah. And I think that's one, you know, we had one statement in the what we read that talked about not only love for the victims, but also love for the perpetrator. And although the rabbi agreed with that, she crossed it out. She said it was too early to introduce that to the congregation because they were still grieving. So that's fair enough. But for me, I want to go directly to the love and compassion, cut the corners, go there, you know, and see that the perpetrators are, you know, in incredibly suffering states themselves. To be able to do something like that, imagine the state of your own mind, you know, to be able to go in and just murder people. I mean, something's got to be very wrong for somebody to think that that's going to make them happy. And, you know, and so when I think like that, it's like I can't hate those people. And when you think of the karma they're creating, horrible. Yeah. So to me, those people are objects of compassion. Compassion doesn't mean what they did was okay. But it means I don't want to spend my life energy hating somebody, because that's just doing what they're doing. And I don't want to spend my life fearing people, because that's just doing what those people are doing too. Yeah. The mayor of Spokane spoke. He was the best one. Yeah, don't you think so? This guy has a heart. And he was talking about, he started out, he said, there are no words to express what I'm feeling. And I rewrote this talk many times, you know. I mean, he just said that at the beginning. And then he went on to say, you know, we cannot accept these things as normal. We cannot say, just because things happen a lot, we cannot say that they're acceptable. We cannot say that they're normal. Yeah, and that we really have to stand up and be very clear about our values and say these things are not acceptable. Yeah. So I really, the reason I liked his talk so much was he was calling for action. Yeah. So to me, that's, you know, yes, you need the grieving sign, but the call to action is how it turns your energy into something beneficial. You know, it's like what the Parkland kids did. You know, what did they do? They didn't, I mean, yes, they cried, but boy, those kids acted. Yeah. And I can only imagine what they're thinking and saying and doing right now after Pittsburgh. But it was a very wonderful feeling. The place was so full. They had to open up areas. You know, they had other areas from their sanctuary that were partitioned off. They were all open. Bill and Marianne were there, and they were seated. You know, they had another temple in the back, so they were seated there. They could hear, but they couldn't see. I mean, there were well over 1,000 people there. And it was very nice. And on the way out, I went and I thanked the cops. And I thanked them, yeah, not because they were there with guns protecting us, but because they were part of the community that showed up to show support. Yeah. So it was really quite a wonderful event, a real feeling of people coming together. Did you feel like that? Yeah. And while we were there, we saw Juliet, and she was on her way after this to a talk at the convention center by Miriam Blumenthal. What was her last name? Leiden? Yeah, something like that. Leiden. Yeah. Who's a Holocaust survivor. This talk was planned a long time ago, but it coincided with this. And so we go there. Who do we bump into? Joe and Mary, who used to be our neighbors, and their daughter. Yeah. And also it was in a huge room, and so many people were there. I mean, way, way over 1,000 people. Yeah, I have no idea of how to. 2,500. Yeah, you think 2,500? It was huge. They kept on adding more chairs. And I was so encouraged because the audience was young by and large, and there were many families. And I think it's so important that the children hear about the Holocaust, because as Miriam pointed out in her talk, they're the last generation who are going to be able to hear from people who actually lived through the Holocaust. Because those people are all quite old now, they're dying. And so she was saying to the youngsters, you have to remember this and tell your kids and grandkids. Yeah. Because there's Holocaust deniers now. Yeah. So her talk was really lovely. It was quite apparent that she had given her talk many, many times before. But that didn't at all dull the impact of the talk. Yeah. And it was really sweet because the rabbi who was hosting it at the beginning, he called up her husband to come sit in the front row. So there they are. They've been married 65 years, and they have great-grandchildren. They got married at age 18, right after the war. Talk of some people who had PTSD, yeah, getting married and surviving 65 years together. That's something, Kathy McMorris Rogers was also there, as was Lisa Brown. Okay. We were all sitting there thinking, because Miriam was really talking about be kind to other people. Here she is, an immigrant, and she was, who came to the U.S. as a refugee after the war, talking about her family, talking about loving this country, talking about, how successful the Jews have been here. They're all, most of whom were immigrants. Yeah. And, and then talking about being kind and not just following somebody because they have a lot of power and they talk loud and they're bullying, but, really thinking and, what kind of leadership you're going to follow. And those we're in the audience, we checked with each other afterwards, all going, I wonder what Kathy thinks about this, because she's our people who don't know, she's our congressional representative who is Trump's right-hand woman, But the presentation was beautiful, And you really see how karma plays out because her family was in Germany beforehand. And the parents saw something was happening, especially after how do you say it? Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht. Yeah, which was the night in 1930, 38? 35, sometime, 39, when there was a huge riot against the Jews in Berlin, was it?
Berlin and other cities.
Yeah, Berlin and other cities and it's called Crystal Night because they smashed all of the storefront windows of the Jewish merchants. Yeah, and so she said this was the beginning of the Holocaust. And so her parents, you see, the German Jews had been so assimilated that Crystal Night just shocked them. It's like, how could that happen? And many of them just kind of said, okay, that was an aberration. It won't go any further. And then, of course, it went further. But her parents, said, uh-oh. And so they started making plans to immigrate to the U.S., and they had all their papers and everything. And a month before they were going to leave, the police came, the Nazis came, and took them all to Holland and put them in a detention center there. And then, of course, from there, it went from bad to worse. And the whole family wound up being sent to Bergen-Belsen, which was in North Germany, one of the renowned concentration camps. And she described the living conditions there, which were horrific. And I have heard another Holocaust survivor speak, and I've read many accounts of it too. Piero Levi, if you ever want to read something, his books are quite something. He talks about it very much in depth. And so, the physical suffering was one thing, but what always interests me is the mental suffering. Because, okay, physical suffering, that's something, but how you deal with that depends on your mind. Yeah, and I think it was her who said last night that the women survived more than the men did because the women had their children to think of. Yeah, especially the mothers. Yeah, because the mothers had their children to think about, and they knew they had to stay alive for their children. Yeah. And so she told the stories. She was a little girl there. She didn't get any education. Yeah. It wasn't until after the war that when she was 11 that she started getting some education. And she graduated at age 18 from a U.S. high school, 8th in her class, in spite of not starting her education, which was in Dutch and Hebrew when she was 11 after the war. She came to the States not knowing English or anything. But, what she used to do as a little girl is she would look for 4 pebbles, and it was her mother, father, Albert, her brother, and her, and if she found 4 pebbles that looked alike, that were smooth and that looked alike, she would say, now all 4 of us will be safe. Yeah. And so that's what she did during the days. And that, you can see that, that's the thing with the mind. If you always have hope, if you always see that your circumstance can change and things can be better, you can keep going on, and that's what she did. Yeah, as a child. When she was 11, she weighed, 36 pounds? Yeah, her mother weighed 70 pounds. Yeah, I mean, they were on starvation diet, and she talked a lot about, the collecting the bodies every day because people died of starvation and overwork and cold and everything else. So she talked about the whole experience, and but you could see, what sustained her through that, and sustained her through her life, And what's remarkable is you think of what she lived through as a kid, and then there she was in Spokane, her life, hot shower, comfortable. People loving her. She got a standing ovation before she even gave the talk. Okay. Yeah, and so how different the life can be at one part of your life than another, just because of the changes in the karma that's ripening, you know? So it was quite inspiring. I'm very glad that we went. And like I said, I was very glad that there were a lot of young people there to hear her story, because these things need to be heard, as they said, so that they won't be repeated. Okay. Do either of you want to add anything to it?
Maybe just one remarkable thing.
Wait.
One remarkable thing, she really emphasized on the role of her mother, and that her mother did everything to support her family, support her, because they have been in the women's section, so she was with her mother. And seeing her, how strong she was inspiring for her, and even that she took the risk to somehow manage it to one day make a soup for everybody. And it was a great risk. And the daughter learned to be so strong. So this example that the officers came into the barrack exactly at that time when she made the soup. And in a haste reaction, the soup spilled over the knee of the daughter. So it was hot and burning, and she could have cried for pain, but she did shut her mouth and she held it in, all the pain. And I'm sure because of this really good example she had there in front of her.
Because if she had cried out,
everybody,
then they would have found the extra potatoes that her mother had taken to make the soup, and it would have been the end for them.
Right, and her mother turned 104 years old.
Yeah, she brought a picture of her mom.
Still alive?
I don't think so.
No, she died.
Yeah, but her picture of her, instead her mom was 104. And I mean, look what people went through. Talk about physical, not being healthy. And yet the mother lived to 104. Miriam is in her 80s. She's walking around fine. Yeah, even though they've gone through such horrible physical treatment, and not to mention the mental treatment, when they were younger. Yeah. So really the resiliency of human beings, that was a big point in the talk. Yeah.
One thing what we spoke about is that she got asked if she forgave. Unfortunately, she said no.
Yeah, we were all kind of disappointed. But when she said she didn't forgive, she cited the actions that they had done. And then she said, but you never blame a whole group of people for the actions of a few.
Yeah. I wanted to add one thing about the vigil, and that was the third characteristic that Rabbi Tamar focused on was gratitude. Do you remember? Gratitude.
Gratitude, yes.
And so that following on the heels of being frightened and being outraged was also her ability to steer the congregation towards gratitude.
Yeah.
And I can't really remember what she highlighted there, whether it was the interfaith support or...
it was the support of the whole community that showed up, that she was very grateful for.
And I just feel very grateful for hearing Miriam's story last night. It was
You what?
I feel grateful for hearing Miriam's story last night. It was very moving and very inspiring.